Hi there guys, my name is Alex Grigg, and in this tutorial I'll be stepping you through a few of the tricks and tips to help you get started animating directly into Photoshop. It's a really powerful tool for creating images, but not a lot of people are aware of how to use it to create animation. So the, s- the layout of the lesson will basically give you it'll start by giving you a really basic overview of how to use Photoshop as an animation tool to create a really quick line test. And then it'll take you through the cleanup process and how to finish an animation in Photoshop. Also giving you a few workflow tutorial tips on actually completing it within a reasonable time frame. So I hope it's helpful to you. If you've got any questions, you can contact me on my website, and yeah, hopefully you get something out of it. Hi there guys, before we get too far into the tutorial, I just want to show you a few websites. Firstly, the Adobe website has the Photoshop version that you'll need. If you don't have the extended version already, you can download the extended version, the most current extended version, directly from their website for free, and you can do it as a 30-day trial. If you have Photoshop CS3 extended, that's great. Any of the extended versions after that are great as well. I think we're about to see Photoshop CS6 extended be released very soon, so I'm sure all of this will work in CS6 as well. Also, I want to draw your attention to mechanicalapple.com, and this is the website of a very talented animation director called Ari Gibson. He was the one that showed me how to use Photoshop as an animation tool. So if you're looking for inspiration, I would strongly suggest checking out his website or his blog for checking out the incredible animations that he does. So yeah, credit where credit's due. Ari Gibson came up with a lot of these techniques while we were making the cat piano a few years ago. Yes. Okay, so to get started, I've opened up Photoshop CS4 Extended. I've made a new file, but I'll run you through that for you now. So create new. I think I'll work at 1280 by 720 for this tutorial. So you put in the width and the height there. I always work at square pixels. Even though this is a moving image, sometimes people use non-square pixels, like DV Power. Square pixels is fine for this. Okay, so I'm going to call it Blinky. And say, okay. So you get a new blank image like this. You have your background layer and that's it. So what we want to do is open our windows and go to animation. As default, your window will open as frames, animation frames. This is what you get for free in the non-extended versions of Photoshop's CS, but when you have CS extended, you can go to this option within the animation window. You can go to convert to timeline. Now, anyone that's used After Effects will be very familiar with this way of working because it's pretty much taken directly from there. So the next step is to define our document settings. This is good to get out of the way when you start, so you don't have to worry about it later on, because there's a few bugs that can happen if you don't. So if you go to document settings within this little corner tab here, we want the duration of our animation. Well, I think I'm going to do 1 second. Let's do 1 second, it's easy. And I'm going to work at 25 frames per second. Often I'll work at 12.5 frames per second, just as a quick way of working, so that I'm working on 2s, and then pump it up to 25 frames per second later. So this is good for now. So next, we just create a layer. The new layer will come up in our timeline. The background layer wasn't in our timeline because it's locked. So once you lock a layer, it will be taken out of your timeline. You won't be able to see it. And this layer automatically, every time you make a new layer,
it will by default be the entire length of your timeline. So, so at the moment, this layer displays for the entire 1 second of the time. If I want to make it display for 5 frames of the time, I can just drag each end of it, like so. Okay, so I'm going to start. If you might get used to using this, you might not know, but if you press Tab, you can lose all of your interface. If you press F, you can get around the screen a lot more easily, so you can draw a little bit more effectively. So I'm going to draw a little man, because I'm afraid that if I draw anything else, I'll draw a bouncing ball, and everyone's, I think, a little bit tired of seeing bouncing balls. So there's a little guy. He's going to be my first keyframe. Now you can draw whatever you like, but I feel a bit self-conscious about people watching me draw, so I'm just going to draw this little guy blinking. So I'm happy with that keyframe, and I'll just create a new layer above it, and you'll see now I've got 2 layers in the animation timeline. It's going to be hard to draw over the top of this while the opacity is at full 100%. So what I'll do is I'll press V and then press 3. It's a really quick way of changing your opacity layers. So the next step is to draw your next keyframe. So in this case, I'm going to be blinking. There we go, a little guy blinking. And then I might do one more layer and make it one more keyframe and make it a little bit of an overblink. Nice big eyes. There we go. Really quickly. He needs a mouth, doesn't he? Okay, there we go. Okay, so that's my 3 layers on top of each other. Now we just need to time it out. Okay, I want this for about, let's do 2 frames. We'll do this one for 2 frames, and this one for the rest. When you press V and then tap 0, you get back to 100% opacity. Now, when you press spacebar, you can see it playing through. So, the next step, now that we have this amazing animation to show all of our friends, is to go to File, and then from the file we go to Export and then Render Video. It's automatically decided it's going to call it blinking. We're just going to call it Video 1. And then you can put it into whichever folder you like. In this case, it's in Photoshop Anim Tutorial, which is where I like it. And you can actually go into the video settings and have quite a few video settings that you can play with. Usually for anything that I'm working on that I'm not uploading to the web, I use the PNG compression. I use QuickTime. So if you go to settings, you can choose PNG. If you're uploading directly to the internet, I would use H.264 because it's well liked by a lot of internet sites and stuff. But for now, I'm going to use PNG because it is a lossless compression and it's also quite good with dealing with big flat colors very effectively. If you want to, it also has a native built-in alpha channel, and all you need to do to use that is use millions of colors plus, and that will automatically have an alpha channel that will be read really well by things like After Effects. and any compositing software that you might be using. So I'll say okay, okay. You can choose straight unmatted is probably best for this. But if you're a compositor, you can choose the one that suits you better. And then simply click render. Okay, and now that's rendered. If I go to open file, which will be here, Blinky, open with QuickTime Player. There we have it. This is in QuickTime. So, a very traditionally executed, very quick animation. You'll probably be asking yourself lots of questions now about how to make this into a production-ready sort of way of working, and that's going to be the next thing I address. So bear with me.
Okay, so now that we have our rough animation done, we're going to want to take it to the next level, which involves cleanup and color and making it look exactly the way that we want. And this part of the process is really where Photoshop shines. You're not limited to any sort of program-specific aesthetic, because Photoshop can create images, anything you can imagine Photoshop can create, which is somewhere where those vector-based programs like Flash flounder a little bit. You have to use a lot of post-processing and a lot of technical tricks to get around the aesthetic that they draw you to. So what I'll show you now is how to take your rough animation to a cleanup level, and I'll also start showing you some workflows that will help you overcome some of the clunkiness that is inherently part of Photoshop, because it wasn't set up as an animation program. So we're going to have to work around its structure a little bit. So I've just done this really quick cleanup and color version of our blinking guy. You can see on the side here that we've got a clean line layer and a color layer for each of our frames. And if we expand our group here, you can see them all laid out in our timeline. You can also expand out if you've got lots of frames and you want to make them bigger so you can see where you're going. Before I get too much further on, I just want to explain why I don't use the built-in onion skin setting here. And basically, that's because it's really slow to draw with. If you turn onion skin settings on and you move to your frame, it renders before and after, and you can go over here and click onion skin settings, and you can say 5 frames before and 3 frames after. You can make it normal rather than multiply. You can do all of these settings, and I mean, they can be really great for certain problems, but I find that as a drawing tool, it slows everything down quite a lot, because it has to render these big images 5 times every time you want to draw any picture. And any time your pen touches the paper, it's going to want to render it again and again and again. So that's why I don't really use it. What I use mostly is just manually dragging these times and setting the opacity to 30 typically, and that gives me the before and after. Okay, so now we've got that out of the way. What we want to start doing is making a clean line layer on top, which I can do by duplicating this layer, selecting it all, deleting it, and then deselecting it, and then deselecting it. Okay. The reason that I don't create a new layer, the reason I duplicate a layer instead of creating a new layer, is that when I create a new layer, it doesn't store any of the time information for the frame you're working on. So you can see here, if I create a new layer, it goes for the entire timeline, which means every time you create one, you'll have to drag it to the specific length that you want to display it. So if I simply duplicate it using this method, it creates it the same length. Okay, so I'll go through that step again, delete it, deselect, and you can already see that simply creating a new frame is quite laborious, and if you have to do it for hundreds and hundreds of frames, you'll be wasting a lot of time clicking through menus and duplicating things. So what we want to start doing is automating these processes that we will be using over and over and over again. So the way that we do that is using our actions tool, actions menu over here. So if it's not displaying already, you can just go to Window and Actions, and it'll come up on the side. So typically I have a big folder full of actions for animation. So we'll make one, I've deleted them, and we'll make a new set for us in the tutorial today. So if we go to New Set, and we'll call it Animation. Okay. And I know that some of these things are going to be a bit of a mouthful, so what I've done is make an image on the side here for you to keep track of what I'm doing. Okay, so we'll make a new action and we'll call it new frame, and it's automatically being put into our animation set. So it's recording straight away, and if we follow our instructions over here, it'll tell us the steps that we want to do. So firstly, we'll press V and then 3, which will set our opacity of the layer to 30. We'll duplicate our layer, like so, dragging the layer to the new layer menu. We'll Control A to select everything, and then press Delete or Backspace. And then Control D to deselect, and then we'll press V0 to set the opacity back to 100%. And now we can stop recording. So you can see over here we've got all the steps that are recorded, and we can minimize that. And a good habit to get into is starting to map these to function keys. I usually use F2 for a new frame, and that means that if I want a new frame from now on, I can just press F2, and that'll go through that entire process and hopefully create new frames for me, which will save you a lot of messing around and hopefully leave more time for animating. Okay, so now we've got an empty layer on top and our reduced opacity layer below. I can do a quick cleanup. For the cleanup in this tutorial, just using this really round brush, but you can use whatever you like. Once again, just pressing Tab to get rid of all my menus because I'm working on quite a small Cintiq. Yeah, so this is a pretty rough cleanup frame, but I think you get the point. And then we can turn off our rough layer below. And actually what I might do at this point is just crop our guy because we're not using the entire frame really. So yeah, this will give us a little bit more RAM to play with while we're animating. Okay, so yeah, now we've got our clean line layer, we've got our rough layer below. And now we want to start making a color. So we want to color our guy. This is one of the things that I was really skeptical about when I first started, because obviously if you simply fill this guy with a bucket fill and get all of this really gross haloing and anti-aliasing artifacts around our lines. So unfortunately there's a workaround for that. And so what we want to do is we'll make a new action, and this will be for our color layer. Creating a new color layer. So if we've got our line layer selected, we go to actions and we say new action, and we'll call it new color layer. And it's recording, which is good. So all we want to do is just follow these steps in sequence. So we'll duplicate our layer, and then we want to step back to this layer. So Alt open square bracket. We want to Control A to select everything, backspace to delete it, Control D to deselect, and then Alt close square bracket, which will step forward to our original layer, and then press stop. Okay, I'll make this a function, F3. So that means every time I want to make a layer below the one that we're working on, we can make a new color layer by pressing F3. Okay, so now we've got an empty layer below our line layer. We want to start bucket filling our lines. So to do that, we will check out this. Okay, so we've got expand fill. So essentially the process is about expanding our selection a little bit so that we can fill to the middle of the line rather than to the gray part of the line. So for example, if I select that and say select modify expand, and I'll expand it by 2 pixels. It might depend on the project you're working on, whether that's 3 or 1 or 5, just depending on the resolution you're working at. So I'll do 2 because I think that's about right for this line width. And then if I fill now in the layer below, it fills right to the edges of the line. No program's perfect, so you will have to manually go through and fix up any little hitches that are in there, but typically it does a pretty good job and it's pretty quick. So just to show you again, I'll make a new color layer below, and I'll start recording my action. I'll call it expand fill. Okay, I'm just recording. Before we start recording, we need to make a selection with our Magic Wand tool. So for me, that's mapped to the N button, and I just select the big white space in the middle. And now I can start recording again. So we want to go back to our color layer here. So we press Alt open square bracket, which steps back a layer. Then we can go to select, modify, expand, and it's already at 2 pixels, so that's fine. Now to fill with with your foreground color, you can press Alt backspace, which fills your selection. And then you can press Control D to deselect, and then Alt close square bracket to step forward to your line layer, and then you can press stop. So now we've got a handy action that will bucket fill things for us really quickly. I'll put that to F4. Yeah, and now typically if you've got a lot of frames, you just go through and do a pass of that, and then go back through and clean up any little bits and pieces for each individual frame, which is actually really quite quick and easy to do. I don't want to have like a bright red guy, to be honest, so I'm going to just change his color to skin tone. Okay, cool. So those are the 3 really handy actions that you can have set up, but typically I have a whole bunch more that are really specific to the way that I like to work. And you'll find that you'll start using your own actions to sort of implement different styles that you might be working in. So an example of something that you might want to do is duplicating the layer, just deleting the layer, and then making a clipping mask. And the clipping mask can be a really cool way of doing shadows or rendering over the top of a big bucket fill. So for example, now this clipping mask is being clipped by your bucket fill, so you can sort of shade it the way that you like, depending on the style you're going for. And this is like a nice, easy way to, and safe way to start doing your shadows if you wanted to do a shadow pass for the designs that you're doing. Okay. So yeah, you would typically go through and do that for every frame, and I've sort of done that for this guy. You can see here I've used a soft brush on the shadows, and I've also used an adjustment layer here to adjust the colors. This is a really handy tool, and if you're an After Effects user, you'll use these a lot in your work probably. So if you put if you put an adjustment layer inside a group, it does this really cool thing where, say I have a background and I want to keep that background a certain color. I want it to be this, and I don't want the adjustment layer to affect the background. What we can do is take all of our lines and put them into a group, and then we can set our group, which is automatically on pass through. I might just make this more extreme so you can see. See the effect. So automatically the group is on pass through. But if I set it to normal, that means the adjustment layer within the group only affects the things within the group, and leaves these background layers completely untouched. Which is a really handy tool if you want to change the colors of a character, or if you want to change hues and saturations for different elements within your Photoshop file. Okay, so that's a few of the steps involved in creating the workflow that I typically use. Okay, before we wrap up today, I thought I'd show you a few other nifty tricks that I didn't get to cover in the walkthroughs that I've done so far. So one thing that I find really cool is that you can actually open QuickTimes and movie files directly into Photoshop. So I've got a video I recorded a while ago for another project, and you can see straight away that there is a QuickTime you can scrub through directly in Photoshop. And what that means in the practical sense is that you can treat it just like a layer. So if I want to make it sort of transparent and start sort of rotoscoping, with this. You can do it to people, you can do it to 3D animations that you've made. It's a really useful tool, you know. So and it's one of the limitations with the software at the moment, it might be fixed a little bit later on, is that you can't bring in sound very easily. So a trick you can do is to export a movie with your sound, and it can just be a little squid about that big, and then you can bring in that movie into your timeline, and when you export you'll have sound in there as well, which is good for lip sync, but obviously not as good as other animation software. So yeah, you can scrub through and start messing with video. You can actually, something that I really like is you can edit the video directly. So if you have a finished animation, you can actually just edit directly into the video, and it saves that information for that frame. So if you were trying to, if there was dust on the screen or if there was a slight render glitch, you can color it out. You can change the color for one frame, which is really handy. You can also adjustment layers just like you can in After Effects, which is quite nice. So this is raw footage, and it would really need to be sort of jacked up, which is really cool. It's really really fun way to make cool little projects. The other quick trick that I didn't get to show you was converting lots of frames into lots of layers into frames quite quickly. So I'm going to make this 12.5, and I'll make this 1 second. Okay, so I've got that here. So I just made all these layers, and they can be your images, they can be an image sequence, all open together. So a really quick trick to sequence these is to say make frames from layers, which will sequence them like so, putting one frame per layer. You can also move layers using this this tool as well. So you can say move layer endpoint to current time, which slams it against your timeline here. After Effects users will be used to that as well, and you can make that a hotkey. You can also say trim as well, which is very similar. But so if I want to say trim this endpoint to there, you can say trim layer end to current time, which will push it to here. Bit of a weird glitch is that it always goes one frame. It takes up that frame rather than stopping at that frame. An interesting thing that you may come across when you start animating and using groups to organize your animation is that if you make your animation like so, and you lay it out using make frames from layers, and you've got your animation playing, and this is lovely animation, and then I group them all. What happens is when you first group them, they'll display all the layers on that frame that you group them. If you go to any other frame, they're fine, but if I was to play back this, you'll see, hopefully, if Camtasia is capturing it, that it still is remembering that that first frame has all of these displayed. All you need to do to get rid of that is to rest the cursor, rest the timeline onto that frame, and then release, and it'll update itself. I'm not entirely sure why that happens, but it's a little bit confusing when you first do it. So yeah, that's a few extra little tips and tricks. Obviously, there's still a mountain of stuff that you'll figure out for yourselves, but hopefully this is a good primer. So you can dive in and start making some really cool animation. I guess before I go, I know that GIFs are really popular, and a lot of you might be interested in creating GIFs for yourself. So I don't do it very regularly. I've only done it once, but I think that what you can do, the only way that I've seen to do it is to say save for web and devices. And then if you set it to GIF, and then looping options, you can make loop forever. And it's probably a good idea to set this. You can set your resolution here. So I'm going to make it 200 wide. And you can play it in this corner here. And then you can just say save, hopefully. And you can save it into wherever you like. So yeah, hopefully this is giving you a big heads up, a bit of a leg up into the world of Photoshop animation. And I look forward to hearing any feedback or any animations that you might make using the process. Please let me know. I'd love to check it out. Okay, thanks guys. It's been really fun.